Keith Halliday. Welcome to Yukonomist, our new chat show about business and economics in the Yukon. Today we're having a special show about the city of Whitehorse and its budget and the services that we citizens receive and the taxes that we pay. And Mayor Dan Curtis has been kind enough to join me here to talk about the upcoming budget cycle and his perspectives on our city and its finances. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Keith.
First of all, I just wanted to ask you if you could give us I think you were elected fairly recently, and maybe just before we get into all the numbers and that, tell us what your first year in office has been like. How's it been like transitioning into the role of the politician, the mayor, all the pressure, all the city council meetings and so on?
It's been fantastic, Keith. It's been a really good experience. I thought I was pretty prepared and pretty in tune to things, but I don't think I was. It's pretty hard to get thrust into the public eye, and immediately people want suggestions and guidance and direction as to where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, and it's really difficult to kind of let people know that you don't know. Like when you just arrive, it's difficult.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult for people who aren't in the public light to understand how intense that pressure can be. So anyway, thank you for stepping forward and serving our city. So let's dive into the numbers a little bit. Over the last 5 years or so, how much has the city budget actually gone up? What was it back then, and where is it now?
Well, the city budget right now, we have two budgets. We have a capital budget and we have an operations budget. I think for your viewers, the one that's probably most relevant to them would be the operations budget, which is $65 million. So over the last 5 years, we've seen increases of about 3% per year. So that equates to about $2.5 million a year, every year for the last 5 years.
Right. And then how much have taxes gone up for the average citizen? I mean, before the show, I went up and I got my tax bill, and mine was about $1,600 in 2006, that is, and then $2,271, which is about going up about 6% a year, which is more than double the rate of inflation. Is that typical for other folks in Whitehorse, or how much of our taxes been going up over that time period also?
Well, I do believe the average residential property would be about $60 a year in dollars and cents, and for commercial it would be about $400 a year that's gone up.
Yeah, so that's dollars. So a typical person's bill would go up $60 a year over the last few years. Mm-hmm. And a business would be about 400.
That's right. Yeah, okay. And percentage-wise, I guess the first year we came forward, the increase was 3.83%, and we have a provisionary budget right now, which was anticipated between 4.5% and 5%. Now the jury's not in yet on terms of what's going to happen with this year's tax rate. What we are trying really hard to do is keep it down to inflation. So I do believe it's about 2.4%. That's inflation rate right now. So we're trying very hard and doing what we can to mitigate that rate increase to ensure the less impact on our citizens.
Now, I know you weren't mayor for the whole time over the last 5 years, just for the last year or so. But from your perspective, having been at all the city council meetings, what improvements in service or service delivery have Whitehorse residents seen, over the last 5 years where has that tax money gone?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I think in terms of where the money goes with the increases that we're continuing to see, I know that the wages is a big one. Wages is about 2%. Gone, increased wages have been about 2% for what overall every year for the last 5 years. And I think one that rings true to me would be one of the services that we're receiving is the evening transit service. I think that's been really popular. It was something that was asked by the public and the private sector. The business community really wanted it to ensure that their staff can get home safely and of course to work as well. So in perspective of that, that's been a real success. From September 2012 to September 2013, our ridership has increased by 9,100 people. So it's up substantially. In the last 5 years, it's increased 50%. And in 2013, we're anticipating to have a ridership of 500,000 people on public transit. So that's only one avenue of what you get for services in terms of the rate that we're paying. Now, one of the reasons that we have continued increases is because a lot of that is regulatory as well. So
what do you mean by that?
Well, there's things like water treatment and sanitary processing of wastewater. I do believe we had 3.9 million cubic meters, 3.9 cubic meters of wastewater that we had to deal with. And every city, not every city, but many cities and communities across Canada have had boil water concerns. We've never had that in Whitehorse, so we're very fortunate for that. But in the last 5 years too, just talking about regulatory stuff, Keith, if we look at the fire department, in the last 5 years, they have had substantial increases because they've had some regulatory concerns as well. So what's happened nationally is before, when 3 people could go out on a call, now they're suggesting an additional person come, and that's just regulatory. So with the city of Whitehorse bringing our fire department back up to where it was consistent with the rest of Canada, that increase is like $2.5 million in the last 5 years. So it's a big increase. It was 19% over the last 5 years, but they're now in line with the rest of Canada. So again, that regulatory additional person, and of course, we do have some really qualified, capable professionals, but they also have holidays, and when they're gone, others have to come and step up to the plate.
Now, the Chamber of Commerce, we'll be having a guest on later in the show from the Chamber. They visited the City Council and talked about their concerns that property taxes on businesses had been going up steadily over the last few years, and also were asking questions like why the taxes were going up even though the city in some years might be running a surplus. What's your perspective on that question that they asked?
Well, thank you for that question, Keith. That's a really good question. And I think what the best answer is when it comes to the generally accepted accounting practices in a business, they're a little bit different than they are in a municipality. So when you see a surplus, I think what the Chamber of Commerce was requesting to know was why does the city of Whitehorse have an $8 million surplus? But the way that the accounting rules work for a municipality, that $8 million is actually for infrastructure that's been spent during 2012. So the Selkirk pump station, for instance, or the road reconstruction on Marwell, that's that $8 million surplus. And there's a whole host of other items that have been done for our infrastructure. So now, because of that infrastructure that's being done in 2012, the surplus they may be referring to, which isn't a surplus, it truly is put into our infrastructure. So now our infrastructure, our surplus, if you wish, is now $379 million. So in terms of our roads and our bridges and our buildings, it's an ongoing assessment that people will come by, professionals will come by and assess the value of the infrastructure within the city of Whitehorse. Other regions and communities, many of them, are actually in a deficit when it comes to their infrastructure, if their bridges are failing or roads are failing. So the city of Whitehorse is in incredibly good shape in terms of our infrastructure, but in terms of cash surplus, it just doesn't exist. We don't have 379 million, and we certainly don't have 8 million. But we do have some really good, strong infrastructure. Yeah,
so I see what you mean. If the city builds a pump house, that puts the city's net worth up by X million dollars. That doesn't mean you have that money in the bank, and you certainly couldn't sell the pump house for money if you ever needed it. So it's a balance sheet asset, but not a cash asset.
Exactly, it has to show on our balance sheet, and we have some great organizations and businesses here in town, and they're very astute, and they've got some great suggestions and great ideas, and we're always open for that knowledge and that expertise, not only from the chambers of commerce, but also from citizens and individual businesses. So we're very, very blessed to have that kind of knowledge here in Whitehorse.
Yeah. Now, the city went through a reorganization. This, again, was before you were mayor, where a number of relatively well-paid senior administrative roles were created, and there was some reorganization. How many people have been hired at the city over the last few years, and how have wage rates been increasing relative to inflation? And the reason I ask is that you meet folks who work in the private sector around Whitehorse who aren't getting automatic government increases, and they sometimes say things about the number and wage rates of government employees. And I just wondered what your perspectives were on that question with regard to the city.
That's a really good question as well, Keith. Thank you. Well, I think our steady growth speaks in volumes as well. We're now surpassed 28,000 people. So I'm really proud of the fact that we have under 300 full-time employees and professionals that are servicing 28,000 out of 35,000 people in our entire territory. So it's, when we're looking at water treatment, we're looking at the fire department, we're looking at planning, we're looking at mechanics, we're looking at an awful lot of skilled labor. It's true, there has been increases. And over the last 5 years, wages have gone up on average 2%. In terms of employees within the city of Whitehorse, and I think in comparison, we can look at it and recognize that the city of Whitehorse and the Yukon have 4 levels of government, obviously, with the federal, territorial, municipal, and First Nation governments. So it's a very competitive market, and unfortunately, we can't pay people what we think that they'll take. We have to pay them what's been negotiated through their contribution agreement and their contract and their union, and really to be competitive, what we need to pay people that are worth the positions that they have and the roles that they do. And we have one more question. I'm just trying to remember what that was. Oh, in terms of the reorg.
The reorg, yeah.
The reorg, we do have 4 directors now. And it's actually helped tremendously, because with the reorganization, we've looked at areas of redundancy and duplication, and tourism was one of those. We're working with the Yukon Territorial Government and ensuring that the services that we may have been duplicating are more streamlined, and we can have more effort and more resource and time being put into the signature events, and of course for the betterment of the operations within the city of Whitehorse.
Yeah. Now, you talk to a small business owner. They also, some of them are getting hit by more regulatory requirements, as is the city's fire department, for example. And they also are getting wage increases requests from their employees. But with the mining sector slowing down here in the Yukon, they may be, having less revenue than last year, or it's very tight for them financially. So when they come to the city government and say, we're having a tough year, you guys should also have a tough year. Can we have, a tax freeze, or can we have, cap taxes at inflation? How do you respond to constituents like that you talk to, who are having a rough year, or a more difficult year than previous?
Absolutely, and that happens inevitably when there any kind of slowdown or any kind of tsunami of activity happens in the negative, for sure. The small businesses are really hand in mouth and a lot of times, and that really is the backbone that we have within our community. So it's a real challenge, and I know that, like the city of Whitehorse, for instance, in the last 5 years for electricity and oil, we're looking at an increase of $750,000. So we get it. Like the small businesses that are not doing as well as they once were or had hoped, or they have employees and they have commitments and they have all these things. It's a very, very difficult challenge for them to be able to kind of carry on.
Now, another thing I wanted to ask you about was, there's been this steady increase over the last few years of both spending and taxes, as you described earlier. What's your perspective? Like, what's the 3-year plan for the city? Because I think it would be nice, certainly for me as a ratepayer, but also I'm sure for businesses, to know with some certainty what's going to happen next year and not have it go year by year. So are you guys thinking about having a more solid 3-year plan and locking into that? Or what are your thoughts on where we're headed over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think to that question, and kind of I didn't quite finish the last one, so I apologize for that. In terms of where does the businesses see the city, taking on some of this burden, if you will. And I don't know, that wasn't your question, but I think what this mayor and council has directed administration to do is do everything we can to get it down to inflation. So the Canadian Federation of Independent Business was suggesting that the city of Whitehorse is doing a really good job compared to much of Canada. And so they're quite excited about that. And ironically, quite timely, I met with them this morning, and they were suggesting that we're actually ranked number 16 out of 107. So to answer your question of looking forward and seeing where I see our administration being directed from myself and council, we have directed administration to do what they can to find a good fluctuation of services and reductions in service and taxes to find that balance. It's exactly what our citizens have asked for. And what we've put forward is saying, do what you can to see how close, if not right on the money, down to the rate of inflation, down to the CPI. So that's what we could send out to the business community and to the citizens of Whitehorse, is that if we don't at least stick up with inflation and stay level with inflation, we're going down. And then we're inevitably going to have to borrow money, which we want to have a balanced budget. So the commitment I can make to all your viewers and business community and the citizens and yourself as a ratepayer is that we're working very, very hard to get it down to the rate of inflation. And ongoing. This is not a one-year deal, but again, we do have a survey, we do have public input meetings, and what the citizens of Whitehorse have indicated is they don't want to have all their services cut or a variety of services cut, nor do they want to see big tax increases every year. So they're looking for a balance, so that's the direction we've given to do what we can to find that balance, that sweet spot, if you will, of getting it down to inflation. And we're hoping that'll go on for a period of time. And I think with some work with the business community and the private communities, working together, I feel very comfortable and confident that we may get there.
Well, it's very kind of you, Mayor, to say that viewers in the word plural about this show. Thanks very much for coming on today. That was very illuminating. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the budget. I'm sure there'll be more to follow as we go through the process and then we get to the votes. And look forward to watching you in action as you and council work through those tough issues on our behalf. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Hi, our next guest on our special segment on the City of Whitehorse and its budget situation is Philip Fitzgerald, a local Whitehorse business executive and a member of the Whitehorse Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I understand you recently, earlier this year made a presentation to Mayor and Council about taxes. So it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming. Just before we came on, I went upstairs and got my taxes, and I looked in 2006. It was about $1,600, and then this year $2,271, which according to my math is about a 40% increase, or about 6% a year, which is more than double the rate of inflation. Is that typical? What sort of tax increases have been going on in the city of Whitehorse over the last few years?
The Whitehorse Chamber of Commerce has made 3 presentations to the Mayor and Council this year on budgets, and we're highlighting the fact that in the last 6 years, with a 20% increase in population, overall our taxes have gone up in the vicinity of about 40%. And what we're hearing in the budget submissions for 2014 and onwards is the city saying that starting with a planning number of 4.5% and then 3.5%, and we're just wondering why and where this number's coming from and how far it's going to go.
And now, does the city have a multi-year plan? Have they told us how much it'll be in year 2, year 3 in the future?
The city's actually, our first communication with the city back in March was more of a question and just highlighting some deficiencies with communication. And to their credit, since then they've provided quite a bit of information, including an open night 2 weeks ago, and they've presented a plan where they're looking in their planning process. They have to go forward 3 years, and they're highlighting that growth, their planning numbers, if everything else kept equal in services, we're looking at 3 and 4% increases for the next 2 or 3 years at least. And some comments on that it would keep going for quite a long time.
Right, and now, of course, some people would say that the city's been growing, we're getting an increased amount of services from our city government. What services increases have you seen, or what's your perspective on what additional things businesses and citizens have been getting for that tax increase over the last few years?
Well, this is the crux of the problem the Chamber of Commerce has with the city and what's been communicated in the budget. What's happening is the city is very good at communicating the amount of where expenses are going per services. And as we highlighted, we're looking at expenses. We're looking at the fact that the amount spent on wages and salaries in the city has increased by 34% in the last 5 years alone. And that's from 22 million to close to 30 million. And we're just trying to work out where the extra money's going. Expenditures on goods and services has doubled from 10 million to 21. And talking with people and anecdotal evidence, everything else being equal, no one's seeing an increase in any of the services provided by the city, although the city is providing more services to more people. So it comes down to a question of sustainability.
Well, I guess it's this classic question: as the population grows, you have more people to provide services for. You have to pick up more garbage, deliver more, water and sewer services. But on the same time, there's more people paying taxes.
Well, no. This is the other crux of the problem. It's apples and oranges. It's people living in Whitehorse use the services of the city, but the people, businesses and individuals that own properties are those paying the taxes. There is another increase in fees in that collected from 3 million to 12 million over the same period, but that's the actual users. So the issue would come to is, at what point does the city start balance the need of the citizens versus of the taxpayers?
And let's dive into what's causing the cost to go up so significantly, especially on the personnel side. Has the number of people working for City Hall gone up dramatically, or is it the average compensation? They had a big reorganization a couple of years ago. How has all that fallen out?
I don't know. Again, it goes back to the information we've been able to get out of the city, and we actually haven't asked. Mayor Curtis, to his credit, has also been adamant about having a transparent government. Every question we've asked of the city, they've provided an answer. But with this one, with the wages and salaries, when you look at, we're just looking at the year-end totals. I know there was a settlement for firefighters several years ago. I know that taking on the Canada Game Centre involved extra people, but the key question is, and I go back to it, it's not an issue of good and bad decisions. It's a matter of sustainability, and at what point, how much city do we want, and how much is it going to cost us?
And how does the Yukon government come into this picture? Because my tax bill here, a good couple $100 of it was paid for by the homeowners grant. Do you think that needs to be raised? Does the Yukon government need to step in here? I guess what I'm saying is there what some federal politicians used to call a fiscal imbalance, that all the money is with YTG, whereas a lot of the demands for new services are with the city?
Well, I'm not an expert in city finances. I'm in the private sector, but I do find a discrepancy where the homeowner grant isn't indexed to inflation, and it hasn't increased for a very, very long time. which is inconsistent with every other credit and everything out there at the territorial and the federal level. Maybe an interim measure would be the territorial government increasing the homeowners grant and then indexing it to the cost of inflation, much like the city's proposing to do with its property taxes.
And now, how does the economic cycle play into what the Chamber of Commerce is thinking? Because in the last few years, we had a very buoyant economy in the Yukon. There were a lot of mining companies coming in, a lot of jobs being created. Now, from what I hear around town, businesses are seeing their revenue lines being a bit constricted, demand is down a bit, customers are being a bit more careful with their money. That makes paying an increase in property taxes even more painful. Are you hearing that from your members?
We're hearing it, but we're also hearing that the Chamber has made presentations now every year for the last 7 years. And what we decided a year ago was to try and stop the rhetoric, just showing up in March and saying tax increases are bad, and then everybody moving on and getting to a point of having a decent conversation. I don't think a property tax increase of between 2 and 4% is going to make a business close its doors. But I know that the next 5 or 10 years of sustained growth at 3 or 4% could be the difference between someone wanting to invest money or keep something going where it's borderline.
Now, in previous years, sometimes city councils chosen to have the increases be different for businesses and for regular homeowners. Has that been a major issue? Does the business community feel the higher rates for some classes of businesses are a problem?
The City of Whitehorse only has 3 different distinctions: residential, agricultural and commercial. The weights haven't relatively changed significantly in the last few years, and we're quite happy where they're at right now. If anything, given that the provision of services by the city, the significant are going to individuals, if anything, we'd like to see the amount allocated to the commercial sector lowered. But at the moment, 68% of the taxes collected are being collected from residential taxpayers, so the commercial sector is there at 32%. So we don't see it as a big issue.
So when you went in to see mayor and council, what were the sort of 3 big things you suggested that they do going forward?
The big one is communication, and they heard us on that. The 2013 O&M budget didn't have a single number in it. There was no financial numbers, but there was an ask for a property tax increase. What we're asking is the taxpayers out there are far more informed and wanting to actually review and see where some of the assumptions, etc., are coming from. Maybe we're a wee bit more engaged than we used to be a few years ago. Second was the presentation of the budgets. The city presents 2 budgets. One is a capital, so what they spend money on assets or things that will have an enduring value beyond a year. And the other is the operations and maintenance budget, which is just their day-to-day expenses. They present them separately, but in their financial statements they combine them. So it's impossible for anyone to actually go back and see how they performed. And what we're asking is that they can present those budgets at the same time. They're asking for 1 property tax increase, but it has 2 components. So we're suggesting they present those twice. And then the third one was just more of a holistic approach, just looking at going, why are we in this debate every year? Our elected officials are in for a 3-year cycle. We've done some research and found other jurisdictions that sort of try to adhere to a 3-year budgeting cycle. So what we're sort of suggesting or hoping is we could start only having to do this once every 3 years. Lock in some property to whatever the rate increases for the next 3 years and move on. And give the elected officials, do it off cycle so they'd have a year to get to speed, a year for consultation, and then they could pass it in their last year and then we just move on. And the city's been quite receptive.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That'd be much more structured, and it would really also give some certainties to businesses and homeowners about what's going to happen.
Exactly, and it also allows the city administration time to actually prepare the materials and review, and it doesn't have to be a rush as it is every year.
Yeah. If we take a step back from all the stories in the newspaper about the city of Whitehorse's budget troubles, if we think about what's going on in the United States with cities like Detroit or Stockton actually going bankrupt, we're in a much better position. But still, even for me as an economist, reading the financial statements of the city and trying to figure out what all those reserves mean and looking at the balance sheet and also figuring out if we have a surplus or not this year from an operating point of view. Maybe let's just take a step back and give us your perspective as an accountant on the overall financial situation of the city at this point.
Overall, right now, the city's actually pretty good. It's not bad, it's not good. The city, according to the last financial statements, has reserves of about $24 million in 22 different funds, and that was another one of our critiques, in that we don't understand what all the different funds are and what they're there for. But the key issue is, and I go back to what the city's talking about too in terms of sustainability, there's significant capital purchases and expenditures in the last couple of years on Whistlebean, for example. Eventually, the liability for looking after the roads, the utilities, etc., will be transferred across the city. And the other one is, of course, the Canada Game Centre and all the other city amenities. I don't think the city is in any way could be compared to anything that's happening in the United States. The other one is the city's pension liability, I think, is $2 million right now.
And that was the killer for a bunch of these big,
Yes.
big U.S. cities.
So at the end of the day, yeah, so I think the city's actually in a strong position, but some of the decisions that we make today are going to have very, very powerful ramifications in the future.
So if you were the mayor, if you were the dictator of Whitehorse, from your point of view, in terms of the future profile of spending and tax increases, what would it be? 0 and 0, tracking inflation, a bit higher than inflation? What would your take on it be? Given that I know that you're at the beginning of a discussion with the city of Whitehorse and you don't yet have all the facts, but what is your sort of perspective on where we should want to be headed?
I think we need to be headed somewhere where there's certainty for everybody and we understand what's going on. And you talk about concepts like stakeholders. The stakeholders right now in the city of Whitehorse are not just the mayor and council, the city administration, it's also the business community, it's also the residents, it's the not-for-profit groups. Looking at the amount of rhetoric and jargon and presentations with regards to Mount Sema this year, the citizens of Whitehorse are actually really engaged and really engaged in where their money is being spent or proposed. If I was the mayor, and no one would understand me, I think at the end of the day, I think the first year would be just maybe put a 0 increase to work out what the city wants, what's going on, and then just see where they're at. But at the end of the day, inflation is a nice base. Everything else being equal, no one has any control over the inflated costs. But anything after that with CapEx and that, I think there's time, we should be using time to think and consider what's going on.
And of course, no city budget discussion would be complete without talking about Mount Sema, as you just mentioned. What's the city's financial capacity to support a city-funded ski hill here in Whitehorse? How big a tax increase would that require if City Council decided at some point to go down that route?
Two sides. I'm going to say the Chamber of Commerce hasn't actually put any opinion whatsoever out on Mount Sema. As someone in the business community, I actually applaud the city for refusing to give more money when there was no certainty on where it was going. I have yet to see an actual detailed ask of what it needs to run Mount Sema. On the other side, a property tax increase of 4% is in the vicinity of $600,000 to $700,000. The city spent $19 million, according to their statement, segment areas on Parks and Rec last year. So when it comes to Mount Sema, I never know what the question is. Is it 100, 200, 400 or 800,000? And what's going on with that? But the city also support, we already have another ski field with the cross-country ski field. We have the Canada Game Centre and all the other facilities as well. If anything, I'd like to raise the debate more about whether or not we can afford Sema to more, where do we want our money to go? Another one might be, why is it the city decides where our recreation dollars go? It'd be really interesting if the city put 5 or 10% of that up for choice, to a referenda or whatever, like an online survey, where do you want your money to go?
It's an interesting idea. Well, we're just at the start of the budget discussion for the upcoming budget. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was very interesting, and thanks for sharing some of your accounting insights. Everyone, that was Philip Fitzgerald, and I'm Keith Halliday. This was Yukonomist, and thanks for joining us today.